or at least got to see their prizes. Sorry. You didn't hear that, I'm sorry. That's a jealous Memphian talking there, you know. So much wonderful stuff in mid-Tennessee. This afternoon we had Carol Roberts from the TSLA, and she's going to introduce the wonderful resource, FindAGrave. Some of you, or maybe many of you, have used it at some point or another. It is really a very valuable resource. I use it a lot when I'm looking for some of the people that we have in our archives, and I'm trying to find some information on them. Often I'll hit upon a FindAGrave reference to them, and that will be a starting point for me because they often add stuff. But Carol will tell you all about that and how how you can make it better for me to do what I'm supposed to be doing with it. You know. Thank you, Carol.
Well, thank you. Well, as most of you all know, I'm a conservator by trade, and I do love to preserve things. And I have learned through the years that FindAGrave is a really neat way to conserve and preserve cemeteries and cemetery stones. And so I have not done probably as much as you all. How many have used FindAGrave, as Gerald said? All of you. How many add to it? Oh, good. Only 2 or 3. Yeah, that's... I thought maybe every single one of you already had your account and was loading up. So I will be glad to talk about that a little bit as well. But I want to take the approach that as archivists and helping people find resources, I want us to do our best to make good resources in FindAGrave. As many of us started with Ancestry, and when Ancestry first started going up first, it's like, oh, this is awful. Everything is wrong. Well, it's improved. It's improved. We find original records there. We find all sorts of ways. And by using Ancestry, FindAGrave is helping also preserve our original records. You can, as Melissa was talking about there, get those records out there. Get those help things. And I want archives, special collections, to see if someone in your group could be log in and be a contributor, because that's what I'm doing now. I will say, a minimal of contributors, because every time I want to go contribute one, it's already there. But so I'm doing kind of a hide and seek of the really hard ones. And that's what I want you all to either be helped find other contributors, find those cemeteries, or find those burials that are the hard ones that really need to be posted. And so that's completely my approach today of going through FindAGrave and using it and adding to it. I have, as I said, added to it. If you've never used it at all, go and, what I say, poke around in it. Because that's the best way to learn to use it, is to use the search and how to search well, to use all the other tools that are there, and look for really neat things that are there. I want to tell you the benefits, and we're going to go through some of those benefits. But I want to tell you the benefits first, of course, is it gives great detail of the cemeteries down to the GPS coordinates. I love the GPS coordinates. That's just the nerd in me because I love maps and I love finding things by the coordinates and by those variety of maps to use. And another really helpful tool is to have the app. Anybody got the app? I love the app because you can take your iPhone or your phone, go straight to that cemetery. And it also has the one when you just push the little location arrow, takes you to the ones nearest you. And that's very helpful if you're in a location, you're in a community, and you want to look for something specific, you can go straight to those local closest cemeteries. But this kind of thing documents cemeteries, documents grave markers that may no longer exist. John was talking about his cemetery up there. They knew how many, 100 for sure. and then you had help do 200 more. And then FindAGrave, you can add those up, even if they were somewhat unknown, and then they're there. But I think that's one of the best things, is documenting some things that you know by tradition or by documentation in the archives, county records, death records, that you can identify where those graves are and those stones are gone. Also, of course, we all know through Ancestry and FindAGrave, it's connecting family relations. You can add, as a contributor to FindAGrave, a biography of yourself and who you are and what you're doing, but you can add biographies now of that person. And FindAGrave is changing its rules a little bit, in that you can go to an edit. Used to, you had to give that information to whoever created that record in FindAGrave. Now they are gaining an edit tool, and you can add that information yourself. It's not perfected yet, but it's on its way. And then, of course, historic photographs and portraits are being added on a daily basis as well. I have been waiting for a very long time of an ancestor who died in Texas in 1888, and there's no image. I was like, 1888, there should have been some kind of image of this poor woman who lived who lived into her 80s. So I'm waiting for somebody to add her portrait to the FindAGrave, but we'll see. Now I'm going to tell you, there are lots of disadvantages, and I think the disadvantages are changing all the time, but still they're there. Number one, to me, Lori and I teach a class for TSLA through Jackson State, and Lori's first class is on primary records and what is a primary resource. You all work with primary resources, the original documents, the original documentation, government records that are as official as they can be. So I tell people that FindAGrave is not a primary resource. Now, if someone adds a document to it or a bibliography, that gives me that clue to lead to primary resources. That's what I want in FindAGrave, are these primary clues to those original records. The other big complications is it is a mistake, and quite often there are mistakes in it. And for example, cemeteries with the same name. I have a small example here of a cemetery. East Tennessee, is particularly Johnson County, is full of McQueens. And yes, there are 2 McQueen cemeteries. The one I want to document is listed in Sullivan County, and it should be in Johnson County. And that's the correction that I need to get to that contributor to correct that. But it is indeed in Johnson County. I've been there. I know where I am when I'm there. Sometimes I don't know where I am. but it's a fun place to find where you're going, The other thing, the big disadvantage, and I don't know which is more disadvantage, but the other is people are going to cut and paste. They are absolutely going to take your stuff and cut and paste it to either other FindAGrave or Ancestry or their written materials. So you have to be okay with it. I think that's a factor you have to realize. You have to be okay with that. I found, so when I said someone's going to cut and paste, and it was even before Ancestry and FindAGrave were merged, that I had made a photograph, and I mistakenly was focusing on the names and the words on the tombstone. I did not realize that my dad was holding the tombstone and his hand is in there. Well, his hand keeps showing up in Ancestry. So I know specifically how to identify my photograph that is in Ancestry. So I'm okay with it. Yeah, that kind of thing, I'm doing it for a reason, and I'm doing it for others to know. Also, duplicates, like I said earlier, locations can be a mistake. Duplicates can occur and be mistakes or correct. The burials can be a mistake. and the cemeteries can be duplicated. Those are two big factors that I would like also for you all to help, if you could, correct. You know those cemeteries in your community. I'm going to use Jill as an example. First time, second time I met Jill, I said, hey, we were in her office, and I said, what is that bucket? And she goes, oh, that's my cemetery bucket. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, when I have to go out to a cemetery, I'm going to take everything with me. She had a spade in there, weed clippers. I'm not going to tell him you had chalk, but yeah, but she had flour and chalk, and she had a little thing to help her upright some cemetery. That was the first archivist / genealogist I knew that carried her own bucket of cemetery tools. So now I just do it virtually. So anyhow, when you as local historians understand that there's a mistake, like Jill would go out and find mistakes in the cemetery and the cemetery books and correct them, you have documentation in your area where you can correct them. Here's the example I wanted to tell you about in Moore County, down near Lynchburg. This cemetery has 2 listings with almost all the same exact burials in the same record. And so it takes some research. One is Bethel Cemetery and one is Old Bethel. And the funny thing about this, and I wanted to show you, it's just an example. In the comments left for the contributor, several people have told him, correct it, correct it, correct it. What is the problem here? But I don't want him to lose this one, because one of the historians down in Moore County said the one that has it as Old Bethel somewhere found photographs of tombstones that absolutely no longer exist in that cemetery. The historian says, I don't know where he got those photographs. Those stones have been gone for a very long time. And he keeps asking the contributor, and the contributor won't tell him. That's probably because he doesn't want to say, because who had the photographs, or even who had the stones, and where they are. And so he's probably sort of protecting his own personal well-being there. But as I said, it is documented. Those tombstones are documented. They are there, and it helps to know that where those stones once existed. And as I said, this is pretty significant cemetery, because these are the main descendants of most of Moore County, particularly the Motlow family, well known with Jack Daniel. In fact, if you've ever been to the distillery or the distillery tour, this cemetery is just right on a little hill right by their main entrance. And you can see it all. And it includes a lot of the favorite tombstones of my area that are 3 long carved limestone rocks built in a pyramid. Do you all have that in Houston? I was told that's Irish. That is an Irish tradition that they would take 2 blocks, almost the length of the grave, put them down, and then put the one on top of it. And then the tombstone with the writing would go on the end. And so that's very Irish in our area. Very well documented with the history of the types of burials. And I want to tell you that when there's duplication, sometimes it's okay to have duplication. In fact, I think FindAGrave would prefer there be duplicated memorials for stones than not. Because this is an example. This is my uncle, and he was Donald Close. He has a memorial stone here in Mount Hope. It has a special name, a cenotaph. I think I hope I'm saying that right. Cenotaph. Because it's only his memorial. It is World War II. He is actually buried in the Normandy American Cemetery in St. Mary-Glees. And so here's another perfect example This is the entry that the U.S. military put in of all the military graves in Europe.
That's cool.
If you need to look and research for that. At least they're working on it. This entire cemetery of thousands of World War II soldiers buried in France are all there. And then someone else, a volunteer, has gone along and photographed their stones. This portrait, back to my saying I'm okay with things being lifted, this is my portrait. I scanned it, I put it in, I put it up on a regular basis, and then a friend of mine thought to lift it from Facebook and post it on this stone. I forgot to do it, but I was like, how did they get there? When I looked him up, I was like, how did they get there? And I was like, oh, that's Jenny Calvin. Okay. Jenny Calvin is a huge historian, family historian, and she does all these tangent families. But she definitely lifted that from Facebook because that's the only place I've posted him. But that's okay because we're the last folks to know who he was. He's my uncle. He was killed 10 days after D-Day, and he was a paratrooper. And this is the way we remember him because he had no family, no children, direct descendants. So we do the memories for him. So that's, like I said, I want you to know, I want you to remember, it is a neat thing that this has linked him back to Mount Hope and all his brothers and sisters and his father and mother buried right here in Mount Hope. So I want to tell you about, and I want you all to encourage you all to find the hard to find cemeteries. And as I say, I love just going out and looking for them. But I don't just start. Most of the ones that I'm working on are related to my family, and I've been told where they are. Now, I will also tell you that I don't even start going looking for these cemeteries till the winter because I hate snakes. I don't like snakes. I don't want to meet one in the cemetery. And so actually this is a much better time with the lighting for your photographs, a much better time for finding it in the weeds. You can move weeds around, all of those kinds of things when you're looking for that cemetery. Because as I said, these are the kind of cemeteries, all the other the easy ones are done. I use maps. How many work with or have in your archives or special collection topo maps, historic maps? All of these things have these cemeteries marked on them, or you at least have some maps. And finding those cemetery surveys and finding the GPS coordinates, I love to use topo maps, and this is why I handed you the handout. These are my favorite websites. And look at yours because most of these are related to the USGS topo maps. And if you've not used that as a resource, I thoroughly encourage it. Because you can even now, if you'll go to even this one that's called store.usgs.gov and go to the little link that's almost hidden in the text, Map Locator and Downloader, you can go and you can find your topo map that you want and download it. You don't even have to pay for it. I'm constantly downloading these topo maps. And another really wonderful thing is they have the modern ones, the current ones, but they're going back and adding the early ones. For example, all the way back to the 30s. When TVA started these maps, they're going back to, and so you're going to have some topo maps for 1934, 35, 36, and the 40s, and so forth. This is a modern one, and this is my community. And I know you can't see it, so I'll just tell you, these are the ones I'm working on. Roberts is up there, Hornaday, Proby is here, Parker is here, Ferguson, and Holton Mitchell. All within less than a quarter of a mile of the house. And so I go daily when I see people want a request, I'll go to the Parker I'm not going to the prairie until winter. It's high weeds. Hope Mitchell has been well cared for recently, and I'll show you that's one I did just a couple weeks ago because it was a clear day and I could get some great images because they're all in the woods. But these are the ones that I like to work on right now, and I love this map because it still has all of them. Here's the 1947 one, and they're not all documented. The Roberts is up there. The Parker is there, and there's a Powell there. The other two are not listed. So that's why I looked at all of them. If there is an opportunity on that topo list, I look at every single year to see how it changes. But then that's just me. I'm a map junkie, and I've looked at them all along. And these are the things. How many have ever used a historic topo? If you have not, please do, because these little markers, I want you to see them, but they're hard to see. Those are houses. That's where your houses were. That's where your churches. This little crossroads right here has all the churches, school, and all the houses that were right there. Little square blocks. And that can tell you precisely where things were in 1947.
Carol?
Yes?
Why were the other two cemeteries not on that top map?
I don't really know. I think probably that Mitchell one is not on there because by 1947, there's not been a grave in it since then. And it just didn't get marked. These others were still being used. And so I think that's the difference, but I'm not 100% sure. When they did these surveys, they'd go around and talk to old folks, as John said. They would talk to the older people, try to identify things, as well as getting the measurements for the terrain. Oops. Now here's another new resource. This is the state and the map and the resources down here at the bottom, 10map.tn.gov. And this is where you may have heard some of our TSLA folks talk about the GIS program of our historic maps and our Civil War information being merged overlapping. This is where that resides. But I want you to know about the property maps. How many know about the property maps? That's like snooping on your neighbor. And this is the TN assessment maps. And this is the broad image, the first image. And you can go in by county, you can go in by name, you can go in by the property address, several ways to search. I find most often in that property address, I give up on the names. Sometimes if you just put Roberts in there, it'll come up, but sometimes it won't. I go in by the road. I go in where it says property address. I don't even put a address. I put Thompson Creek Road, or I put Smith Chapel, or a generic thing. And that's when it comes up much more easily. But go and use this resource, because it is the property and the property owners. I'm telling this to the world. But we're all working with county records, we're all working with state records, or historic records, private records. This is public record. This is public record of the property owners. And the neat thing about this is mine. This is all our track. This is not. That's across the road. We don't count that. But this is the cemetery, and it is noted on the tax records. That's what I love, is that 99, but not all, 90% of cemeteries are in this tax assessment. Cemetery Roberts, Thompson Creek Road. And it's easy to find, and it's marked off. I tried to get it where only the yellow was marked, but it didn't quite work for me.
Carol, have you ever used a website called historicaerials.com?
Yes, I love that as well, but I prefer I prefer topos because I get, okay, is that in a valley or is that on a hill or if it's on a ridge or a lake or river or what have you. But yes, I love those as well. As I said, there's another one called, is it Dave or David Rumsey?
Oh, Dave Ramsey. No, Dave Rumsey.
Rumsey Map Collection.
Rumsey Map.
Yeah. That is a private collection. It's all been uploaded. It is amazing. And that's helpful as well.
And what was that name again called
It's
again?
David or David Rumsey. If you just do Rumsey, Rumsey Map Collection, it'll come up.
Yeah.
And it's a public, isn't that a public?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It is, but if you want to download it or show it on your own website, then you have to contact him and get permission, and there may be a fee.
And a lot of those have since gone up in, are you aware of this, Digital Public Library of America? I hope, go home and use that, because those Dave Rumsey maps show up in there, just for you to view. But I do enjoy looking for these cemeteries in the property assessment maps, the state version. These are very well dated, because it's part of the law that the tax code materials that are collected in the county are required to go to the state level in the state tax assessor.
Now, this is just current records, though?
This is current.
How far back did it go?
The listing will go, it varies. And the listing will, that's a very good question. There's here, for the most up-to-date, there's a little click here, for the most up-to-date ownership and assessment information. And quite often, if there's been changes, it will go back, but not very far. But also varies based on, that's another thing that I've done. I go here first, I look for a tract of land, I look for that tract of land and who the current owner is, and then I go to the current register of deeds, look for that and do my trace back. It's an amazing, easy deed search. Yes, ma'am.
In Montgomery County, the assessor's office has all tax cards. I'm sure this is common.
Yeah.
And on the tax cards, frequently they'll go back 5 or 6, there may be
Yes.
3, but 5 or 6 owners. Sometimes you can track the whole thing
Right.
on those tax cards.
Right.
I have those.
And everyone should have it. The tax assessor and the trustee should indeed have those, because that is part of the requirements of that office by law. And they are required to be public record. Here's another one that I'm going to do. You may think I have a real thing about snakes, but both of these areas have a tendency to have rattlesnakes in my area. And so I really don't want to run up against one of them. This one is incredibly hidden, and this one's not been done. And so this is my goal this winter, is to go get this cemetery. This is called, this is just like, and this is 3 graves, just 3 or 4 graves. And it's never been, and this is one that's never even been uploaded into FindAGrave. So this will be, I found one.
Is it
I uploaded a whole cemetery and realized that it had already been done.
Is it a family cemetery?
It is.
Okay,
It
so
is.
you can add family cemeteries to
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. You can add any cemetery provided you do it correctly
Sure.
and do it accurately. Now, FindAGrave may not complain, but you'll probably get a lot of complaints from others in your email within FindAGrave.
How far off the road is that?
That? Well, I'm going to have to go up John Brinkley Road this way and go out a ridge that way and probably hike to it about, I hope not more than 400 yards. But all of that's dirt. This is remote. This one's very remote, which is why it's not been done. So, once you've located and worked with maps, the other thing that I recommend that is also not a primary resource, but a very useful tool, are cemetery record books. Does your county have one? Okay, how many are aware of those? This is the pre-internet. folks would go out and survey the cemeteries and get every name they could. They would talk to people, get every name they could, and then they would publish it in a book. We have one for every county just about that's done one. Some inventories have even been updated. And this is an excellent record for historic ones. Also obituary books and early death records. Here is an example of some of those. These are published books of obituaries that people have compiled. This is Hoover Funeral Home Records, also an excellent resource if you've ever heard of those. And then, of course, here's the cemetery record book for Bedford County, done in the 1970s and early 80s. And that's what I'm saying is a lot of those stones that are in that book no longer exist today. And so these are excellent proofing to find the cemeteries and the records, the burials. Here's the example. I found Benton County, Lori, Bedford, Benton, and Coffee. Coffee is a recent resurvey of their county. And so they've been doing those as well. And now Bedford's is just the name, the birth, and the death date. Coffee County went back and transcribed as best they could every stone, whatever it said. So those are incredibly helpful. Now here's an example of those pages from one of those inventories. This is the one I worked with last week, the Holt Mitchell. And this is what they inventoried back then. And there are maps, at least in the Bedford County example, there are maps in the front of the book that tell you where that cemetery is. And the map number 12 in the front of the book. Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 there. But then they have this added, many unmarked graves. And so these are the ones they found there, but they knew that they were there. And so that is what I went through. And I realized that a very helpful little lady went through this book and transcribed the book into FindAGrave.
Wow.
Yeah. She was somebody who could no longer go out and look for cemeteries, so she took the book and typed in a new cemetery, typed in those graves, and then others have gone in and put in photographs. Now that's an advantage. However, guess what? She passed away. Nobody has her password. So there are tons of things that cannot be corrected because she passed away and with her went the password. That's the disadvantage. And you want to be able to either know those passwords, work with those folks. FindAGrave will, if you identify that you are a family member, they will release that entry to you, but that's one at a time. A friend in Tullahoma has asked for a whole cemetery that the lady who passed away be released to her, and they won't do it. There are a lot of rules and regulations that FindAGrave has posted. How many have ever done that? Read the rules and regs? Oh, good for y'all. I didn't. I didn't. But anyways, this is your helpful secondary tool for those cemetery listings. Here are the two that I intend to find this winter. This is that one I just showed you with 3 carpenter graves, and it's listed as Stone, but there's only one man named Stone and the other carpenters. And here's one, the Anthony Cemetery with 1 grave. And I'll use my dad's quote. My dad used to say, I'm the only one that knows where that one is. Well, he passed away last year. I'm the only one that knows where that one is. and Matt, that one is going to be hard to find. I have to get in a 4-wheel Jeep and go on neighbor's property and drive up to it because it's up 2 ravines and down another and off to the side. And I hope they have it. And I hope they haven't plowed it under. Because it's in the edge of a field. And so it should still be there because the last property owner put a little fence around it. So I'm hoping it's still there. I saw it personally 10 years ago. And so, but we did not photograph it then. Didn't think about it. We were just out roaming around, looking at property. And so, but that's my goal this winter, is to get a full-wheel something and get over there. So here's one more resource that your community may not have. This is one of the neat and something you can encourage schools to do. This high school, junior high teacher in Tullahoma, Tennessee, started teaching local history by taking his class to one cemetery every quarter. And they would clean it. Each student took a grave and researched it. And they researched census records. They researched everything they could get about that person. And they called it, and this one happens to be the Shofner Cemetery East Middle School Project. I mean, I cannot say enough about what this teacher did to teach local history to his students. Why it meant something, why the cemeteries meant something, what it means to history, and what it means to local history. So if you have any teachers that are looking for a project for local history, this is where you can encourage it. They even went out and when they could found family members, older family members to interview about that cemetery. It's just was, I mean, and this teacher has since passed away, and I don't really know whether they've been doing it, but he would publish these little books, and he always made sure the local library had a copy and TSLA had a copy. And they're incredibly valuable. And he started this before FindAGrave. So it's another really good resource. And I want to encourage you all to encourage people to try to do that if it's a cemetery that's not been well cared for or very little known about it. I have begun to use death records for the cemetery. This is of course post 1900. In fact, in Tennessee, it's post 1913 for the most part, 1914. But I start using the cemeteries, and I look for them on the death record, and I look for that, and then I go, because this is one of our few in this process, a primary record. And quite often it's mistaken. This one has been transcribed in Ancestry as Harrison Cemetery in Moore County. There is no Harrison Cemetery in Moore County. That's Hurricane. And so again, local history, you have to know the difference. Somebody comes and says, I've got a death record. Where's Harrison Cemetery? It's not there. And so you need to know the difference. And so death records help you. They lead you to the obituaries. They lead you to those genealogies. All of those things. And of course, as you hope know, Tennessee's death records are online for all Tennesseans to have access to through the Tennessee Electronic Library. Another one I like to use sometimes are the WPA records. Are you all familiar with those? The WPA, okay, good. The WPA recorded and proved many cemeteries, but not all of them. And that's again from the 1930s, pre-TVA projects. Now, here's one, and I want to give credit to John. This is a cemetery burial that I included. As I said, my dad said, I'm the only one that knows where those are buried. And I said, Daddy, you've told me. So now I know. Well, our goal has been to include this. These are slave graves in our family cemetery. They were only marked with field stones. The first generation in this cemetery were only marked with field stones, all of them. And we knew where they were. We knew where the dips were in the ground. And so with John's help, I put together as best I could the biography I wanted which is extensive because I wanted to include my, not bibliography, but where I found the research. Because these names were traced through estate papers. Estate papers in Virginia and estate and deeds in Bedford County. And so I was able with, as I said, this was the best I could come up with. African Americans who came to Tennessee with the Lacey Roberts family and are buried here between 1811 and 1855. And so I wanted the entry. I didn't know what to put for the first name. So I put unknown for the first name and Lacey Roberts for the second name. I feel like that's a pretty good documentation for anyone who's looking for any of the Robertses or even this Lacey family, because this Lacey family never owned any property in Bedford County and came from Virginia and came through, and then these African Americans went on with the more next generations of family on into Texas, Alabama, Texas, and on west. The typical migration before the Civil War. So I'm proud of my history project for this year.
On that line, when you come across, for instance, I know of 2 cemeteries that are not on FindAGrave, but they are family, what we call family cemeteries. But there are multiple names, last names in the cemetery. Is that the best way to list it, as unknown, family name, family name, family name?
If they're not already if they're already not in FindAGrave, you can assign a name to the cemetery and do the cemetery yourself. They do not like for you to do unknown, unknown. In fact, they will probably edit it out if you did unknown, unknown. So what they prefer you do is some of the names that you know of or have an unknown name, unknown Roberts. There are also the rules frown upon any of those things that are not going to narrow it down either. For example, what you're saying, they would want some kind of name that you could proof out some other way and put it up there. And be willing to get edits from folks who might know that something is there. But FindAGrave will let you do several things that will help you to lead people to that. For example, I didn't want to do, there should be 4 former slave graves there, and I didn't do 4 entries, I did 1. And because I'm not 100% sure. We're pretty sure we had a TVA, we had a neighbor who worked for the TVA grave removal projects. He worked to move graves from Tim's Ford Lake Project, Normandy Lake Project, even down in Chattanooga. So he's very good at knowing how to find, without the radar, he knows very good how to find the grave spots. And so you can put in like 3 unknowns, and then, but in the biography, explain what you're doing. And then therefore they will probably let you keep it. For example, do you know like a Smith cemetery? And 3 Smiths that you know are unknown, and they'll let you do that.
Well, one of them is part of my genealogy, and it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it took a considerable amount of work to find it. Did find it through talking to older people. And the other one is here in the Nashville area. My sister bought property, and there's a cemetery on the property, and I've not been able to find any information.
Are there any grave markers?
There are grave markers, and there are names on the grave markers and dates, but the cemetery is not marked on any map that I found.
That's probably what you would have to do, some extensive genealogical research. And that would be where I would start doing some deed searches to see who sold it to whom. And I very seldom is the cemetery identified on it, on a deed, but occasionally you will find that. But we've done that with a couple of cemeteries and just did some simple genealogies, local written text published genealogies of ancestry, sort of just a general approach. We're doing that right now with that Parker Cemetery that I was talking about in my family, is that there's a McGill in that cemetery, and we're trying to decide whether he's junior or senior in the cemetery and whether his wife is there or not. Family tradition says his wife died later and she's buried in the next cemetery over her family. And so there have been people who put those burials in both cemeteries and let it ride as duplicates. A while back, about 3 years ago, a family put a burial marker in that Powell Cemetery, hoping it would be there. And we kept emailing her and saying, it's not there. And we can't remove that burial in that cemetery. She has to remove it. But she's still hoping he's going to show up there. Well, I don't know how that's going to work, but it's going to work one day. But we have several like that as well, and that's what I did for her. I started communicating. I have become an unofficial community historian, and so she had that listing there, and she had the listing there, and she put on Facebook for me. And because her name is Ross, R-A-U-S. And the community that I live in is Ross, R-A-U-S. Well, she found by searching Ross that my Facebook came up. So she kept asking questions. It's like, okay, well, all right, I'll do research. And so I've done extensive research, and there's no way her family is buried in our community. They're just not there. There's no tradition. There's no documentation. There's nothing to prove that that grave is there in that particular cemetery. But the burial entry is still in that cemetery. She's hoping someone else will find it, and they might. But I did her research, and I started doing research, and her entire family, while they worked in our community and they were postmasters in our community. They were postmaster. Her great-great-grandfather was postmaster, and we had too many Thompsons in Tennessee. So they said, okay, we'll just name your community Ross. Well, that man only worked there 1 year. But the name stuck to this day. From 1892 to this day, we are Ross community. Her family owned property for 3 generations in Franklin County, 10 miles away. And I've been over to the cemeteries over there looking for her family over there. And I've had to go to 2 family cemeteries that have next to nothing in them as far as unmarked graves. It could be there, but it's not even a field stone. I went, and I'm still looking, and I still go back over to that community looking for her. Well, this is her great-grandfather. I looked for her great-grandmother and her great-grandmother's family, and I can't find them either. And so that's the wonderful benefit of FindAGrave, is those families are not showing up anywhere in our 3-county region. And so that's what we're trying to sort out, is where are they? And we haven't found them yet. And so all the more reason to keep adding these family cemeteries and family graves that do show up. And so that's my goal. They're doing these odd ones that are just really out there. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but in Tennessee, while there may not be a road to a family cemetery, if you ask politely, they're not supposed to restrict your access to a cemetery. You should be able to go to a particular cemetery, especially if it's still being used or used recently. But there are laws to protect cemeteries from being bulldozed under. There in Tennessee, I mean, so many, you talk about a Nashville cemetery, I'm really surprised it's still there. Because so many cemeteries have been plowed under for subdivisions. And that doesn't even include Native American cemeteries or African American cemeteries that had no stones at all or no grave markers. And so how do you think I got into this? My name's Carolyn.
You were looking for somebody.
What movie?
Carolyn.
Oh.
What was that movie about? They had
Buildings on top of stairs.
That's right. So, all the more reason to include the fact I have been, I saw that movie, I didn't think too much about it, and then people started calling me that, like that movie. And then you see, I see people, and so it's kind of in my nature a little bit. To make sure that cemeteries are identified somewhere. But like I said, I like doing the hard to find ones. You should pick up and try to do the hard to find ones. Do the research even if you have, give that. We have given tasks, not in a mean way, but we have given tasks to people to do research to improve their research skills. That's another thing you could do with students. If they want to do a research project, like the history professor in Tullahoma, give that to a researcher and see what they can come up with. And because there's got to be some level of record, even if it's just the census records of where they were at one time, even if you're tracking it down to a district, a civil district. All of those kinds of things. I like to have fun with it. And I'm not disrespectful, but it's just fun. How many of you ever heard now of geocaching? Geocaching is a huge thing. If you put a Pokemon in the cemetery, that's illegal. Pokemon, excuse me. But having fun with it at the same time. Kat Hopkins in Tullahoma and I and Lainey, another friend, we went and did a whole cemetery that had not been finished. There, and you'll see on FindAGrave it says 20% photographs or 50%. We went over and did the whole thing. And my pants are not polka dotted. Those are stick tights.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Kat went home with poison ivy. So another reason to go in the winter.
Looks like that, yeah, are there snakes?
I never saw one. It was late in the fall, so I don't think there was one. But we had a good day going over and going through every single grave. We downloaded the list. We printed out the list. We marked off what had been done, and then we got a photograph of what had not been done. We divided up the photos we took and came back and uploaded them. There's still some that are not uploaded simply because there was not a grave marker with names on it. There was just a stone. And people that know, I'm going to add to several cemeteries in our community. I have notes from a little old lady that was my babysitter when I was a child, and her name was Miss O.C. Brinkley. And she died when I was she died in the early 60s. But before that, she was an avid researcher. And she noted where all of her grandparents and great-grandparents were buried. And so those are notes. And the cemetery I started with that I was telling you about, the Holt Mitchell, she has like 5 or 6 people that she says are buried in Holt Mitchell, no grave, no marker. They have a stone, but no marker. So what I'm going to do, like you're talking about in the family cemetery, I'm going to go back and put Brinkley and that name, but unknown stone, unmarked stone. And I'm going to put the notes in the biography that O.C. Brinkley identified this as being their burial, and let it run at that and see what happens. See if FindAGrave leaves it for me. I think they will, because I've seen a lot more mysterious things uploaded from cemeteries than that, with less documentation than that. But anyways, just be prepared for anything. So that concludes my presentation. What questions do you have?
I have an interesting, probably unusual question. The house I was born in and raised in had in our backyard two tombstones. At some point during my childhood, and I was too young to remember when that was, I was too young then, not now. Those stones were taken out and used as stepping stones by my family in different parts of the farm.
Yeah.
My oldest surviving brother does not remember any names on any of those stones. I have a picture with my dad standing with two other men, one of them being a World War soldier, in front of one of those stones, but you cannot see the names of the stones.
Really?
Any advice on how to find out who is buried there?
Oh, that is good.
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah. I would, that is a good question. I don't know what.
This is in
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Do you know how to make the entry of the name itself? Or you don't know the name?
I haven't done anything. I haven't had
Not
anything.
even the last name?
Well, the thing is, I don't know if it's my odd family or not.
Uh-huh.
I think that the property was owned by my direct ancestors, but I don't know if the cemetery was there.
Yeah.
They could have added the house to the location next to the cemetery. Like, I have to do some research. I just need some advice on what types of records to look for to see if I can find who may or may not be buried there. Most of my direct ancestors are buried in church cemeteries nearby.
Well,
and I know where they are.
Yeah. I guess I would start with the deeds and see if there's deeds in there and there's a cemetery listed. You might even look in, that would be my starting point. But see if the
deeds. Time
deed,
off to go home and do that, I guess.
or looking at state records. They might have mentioned it in a will. And then other than that, if there's no, and of course if there's no birth or death records. Jill, what would you do?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of it.
Oh, he said that there used to be a cemetery of two stones in a yard, and now they're not there. And but he doesn't know anymore what.
Well, the first thing I would do is start backtracking on that property.
Yeah, that's what I
Even
said.
if you don't have a time period, look at the property records and see if there's any documentation that indicates a cemetery.
Right.
And look at those maps.
Yeah.
Because frequently it's on the older maps rather than the newer ones.
I would definitely look at maps for, as much as possible. As you said, you've got a World War I image. There might be an 1878 map, an 1890 map. The 1890s postal route maps have some neat cemeteries on
I
them.
have an atlas for the county which shows this property owned by my great-grandfather, but it doesn't show a cemetery.
Right. I would actually look at those older blueprint style postal routes that they established. They had cemeteries and schools and buildings on them, so that would be my suggestion
All right, thanks.
too. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We did a fair amount of research on cemetery law, the East Tennessee Preservation Alliance in 16 counties. And I was curious, you said it's against the law to go in and plow over cemeteries and everything, but one of the questions we tried to get satisfied through the representatives at the state level was who enforces these laws? Is it the sheriff, local police?
I start with the Tennessee Historical Commission. They have a staff member who is responsible for the laws and rules and regulations related to the cemeteries. Now, sometimes they can go back to the sheriffs, go back to the county lawyer, whatever the case may be, but they can quote those rules and those regulations too, and because they are state law. And I'm sorry, I do not know who that representative is now, because the one I knew and worked with very closely retired. But I know someone has been assigned that task to care for cemeteries. Yes, ma'am.
Talk to your local district attorney.
We-
I have prosecuted someone doing exactly that.
Yeah, we've approached the police and the sheriff, and they county officials and everything, and most of them just want to back away from any
Yeah,
responsibility.
they do. They do,
That's true.
but have you talked to the DA?
Not directly.
What county are you
Campbell County.
in? I can't remember who it is.
But yeah, I would try those district attorneys. That's true. Because if you get those laws and rules and regulations about cemeteries and not being plowing them under, then he can kind of go with it. Yeah, just
Or did you say plowed under?
yeah.
All it takes is some farmer or some developer overnight, and we've had several instances of this, and we can prove, and you can't do anything about it because we didn't witness it.
Right.
And
We have the exact same thing in our community as you had, Tom, that with the new owners of an old house moved a stepping stone, turned it over, and it was a tombstone. and with the name, and I started a research project of that name, and I haven't had any luck yet. And we sort of knew where the cemetery was, but not exactly. And but all the stones were removed and made into stepping stones.
Yeah, I remember clearly stepping in some of these stones the other day.
Yeah. Yes, Ms. Holmes.
I have a similar situation. My three great grandmother's tombstone was found in a ditch. The property was a family cemetery. This was back in the 1800s. Okay, and somewhere in the 1920s, that property was sold several times. The graves it was farmland. They bulldozed it, and a neighbor told my dad where there was some rocks, some burial stones, and they found it in a ditch. So my dad took it to his house. He died 4 months later. My cousin took it to Memphis, and I now have that stone about 3 great. What do I do with that?
That.
Cemetery no longer exists.
Archive.
Don't laugh. We have some that have been given to us.
Well, there you go. Put it in the archives.
Give it to
yourself. What county is that?
Well, she was buried in Gibson County, Tennessee, and I live in Dare County, and it's in my yard.
They went to Memphis and come back to Arkansas and back there.
Use it as a stepping stone.
Oh.
Well, how do I document that?
And that's a good question.
And she found in genealogy where the doctor who was that woman's wife,
No, it's mother.
was
Where
shipped
you
from
both
Memphis
stopped.
to up there for she
burial.
documented all that.
Wow.
But what do you,
I would try to make it a FindAGrave entry, and I would try to make it a FindAGrave entry. Document that if you know approximately where it was in Gibson County. Make even a new, even if you made, and that would be what I would do. Make a new cemetery entry in Gibson County and put that in there, and then in the documentation, where they say make a bio, explain all of that.
okay.
Just briefly, succinctly. You don't have that much space there, and let it run and see if you get any comments. It's been really interesting, the comments you get back. When I said that we did that whole cemetery, people started asking us questions and sending us more details to add to the entry. That happens regularly. If you make a simple entry, family all over, California, everywhere, are going to send you detail and say, put that in there, or would you transfer that to me? And be willing to do that. We were very willing to create the entry, and then if someone said, that's my family, and say, okay, would you like to take responsibility for that entry, then you transfer that, as they call it, memorial, to that person and let them take care of it. I want to do that for this one that I found. I did not find it. Our neighbors found, when they unturned their stepping stone, it had been a tombstone. And so I want to create a cemetery for that. because all the older folks in our community said, oh yeah, that was that cemetery up on the hill, and it's gone now, completely plowed under. And that's exactly what happened. Was the farmer wanted more farm, the cemetery was in the edge of the field, it was inconvenient, so they plowed it right under. And I know that happens way more often in West Tennessee than people like to admit, because of those flat land. And they've got a cemetery right smack in the middle of their pretty soybean field. So,
Thanks.
yes, sir, Mister.
Didn't they do that? They were working on an airport, putting in a new apron or something?
Yes.
They found like 40 graves or something?
Yes, it happens all the time. And yes, in fact, at the cemetery, and that was one of the things, before I started working at TSLA, I worked for the Metro Historical Commission, and we were doing historic structures surveys. And we were also documenting cemeteries. If there were a cemetery with that, and we documented numerous cemeteries out in that community, southeast of the airport, and they had to either move it or document it and leave it. And in fact, at the airport, when you fly into the airport on the main runway, you can still see the cemetery that was Central State, which for over 100 years was the asylum, was Central State Mental Hospital. And as patients died there, they were put in that cemetery. And yes, they nearly plowed that cemetery under, and they had to protect it. And that was a very extensive issue when they were redeveloping the land around the end of the airport. So it happens all the time. All the more reason of you all as special collections folks, local historians, local county archives, all the more reason to know about those cemeteries. You know, and as I said, it never occurred to me until I saw that Jill had a bucket of tools. That she knew right where every cemetery was. And so, like I said, I have become the keeper of information for my south end of Bedford County and even the north end of Moore County. And so I work with all of those historic records now to try to pinpoint. And in fact, are we still running? Oh dear. Am I over time? Okay. Several years ago, I was asked to do a project on using county records. And I had been given a task that two families wanted to mark with a grave marker stones that only had field stones. And they had prepared these stones, and they prepared them for where they thought this one lady lived. And so I went out and learned about it. I learned it from from the older folks that were there that day who wanted to put down that marker. They put it down for a field stone in the edge of a field, one grave. And so they put it down, and they asked me to see what else I could find out about this person, about what happened to her, and so forth. When I started doing the research, I knew she'd been murdered. And I had a ghost story for this woman. I had all of this 9 yards. And I started researching, and I used Bedford County records and Moore County records. And once I got the county archivist in Moore County to start helping me, that stirred up a whole hornet's nest. And lo and behold, the person who was thought to have been a woman buried in the edge of the field had been buried over in another family cemetery that was identified in Moore County, but her grave was not marked in any way in the records, in cemetery books, in any wills or estates. And so Christine used the cemetery book, said, go over and look at this other cemetery. Well, sure enough, this lady who was thought to have been buried on the edge of her farm, when actually because she'd been murdered, the family who her family buried her over in their family cemetery. And yes, she does have a grave. She has a grave marker over there, and the descendants were a little bit upset that we were searching about her in general and stirring up bad memories for their family. So we let it kind of ride, if you will. But who's buried on that stone where they put a marker for her? Well, I ruled out people. When you were talking about your graves in the family grave, I used all sorts of different things, and I really think it was her husband buried in that edge of the field, because he's not buried anywhere else. He is not identified anywhere else, and all of his family is identified elsewhere but him. And so I think she was a widow when she was killed, and I think he earlier had been buried there in the edge of their field, because his father and mother are buried on that farm in the edge of their field. And there are his father and mother are buried with another family member with only 3 graves, and he's up on the edge. So it's a tradition, if you see, of burying the family on that land that they had owned. And so I had to work on the process of elimination, that no, it wasn't her, it wasn't the widow, but who was it? And so I kept working back, and that's the only thing I can come up with. I have found all the family members and where they're buried, his children, I found her, I found everybody but him. And so by process of elimination, think, I'm not going to put it in FindAGrave, but I think it's him. That's buried. I think it's his grave there. So, any other questions? Any other horror stories? Since this is sort of the season.
Not a horror story, but I found some people that I was looking for in corporation papers that I guess were filed in the Secretary of State's office. I can't remember exactly where it was, but there was a plat of the cemetery. This is late 1800s. A plat and a copy of the ledger with all of the burials.
Well, I think you're incredibly lucky. Because that's more of I hate to say the word city style cemetery, if you will. So people bought into it. And yet they're not identified in FindAGrave. I want to go over to Woodlawn in Nashville and do some images in FindAGrave for those buried in Woodlawn. And they don't restrict it. They frown upon it, but they don't restrict it. Mount Hope is very glad for you to come and take photos. Have you ever heard of anybody having a problem with Mount Hope? I've never had a problem with going over Mount Hope and taking all, but it's not completely documented, and not at all. The other cemetery down here in Franklin has a great history written about the cemetery itself, doesn't it? The Old City Cemetery, they went back and did a great history, I think just because they were going to make it a National Register nomination. But the urban cemeteries are very well documented, and we have tried to encourage those urban cemeteries as they change businesses. We encourage them to donate their records somewhere rather than tossing them, because we were afraid one of the older city cemeteries in Nashville was just going to toss their old records, because they're old records, they're old stones, we know where they are. Well, no, I can tell you from research that I did in college that we found out that they made a big deal about the cemeteries at the Nashville Zoo, the Shute family. We knew that cemetery was there. We told them that cemetery was there. But another interesting thing that happened was that we identified that the family, for some strange reason, The family decided they didn't want to be buried out back in the family cemetery in the field. They decided they wanted to be buried at Mount Olivet. Well, they moved the physical graves and they moved the people's burials, but they left the stones back at the family cemetery out behind the house and the Chute family cemetery. I never figured that one out. We've known of people moving the gravestones and leaving the burials, but I've never heard that they go to the trouble to move the burials and leave the stones. And maybe they were intending to make a new stone and didn't do it. We never figured that one out. Never solved that mystery. Why didn't they just, when they went to all that trouble, just take the stone with them? Whoever moved it. But anyways. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What do you do when you have a family member that someone, my aunt passed away 6 years ago, and before I could go in and put her in FindAGrave, someone else did this, and she's buried in the family cemetery, which is 20 graves, and they have put her in this huge
cemetery.
You
have to keep emailing and messaging the person.
And see, she's linked my aunt's daughter.
It's all
passed
wrong.
Away, and her husband, and so
Two things FindAGrave does. You can keep contacting the person who contributed it. They call them contributors. You keep emailing and contacting her. Please, will you please, or let me, or transfer that memorial to me, meaning, transfer it. And if you get no satisfaction, then email FindAGrave. Email the FindAGrave administrators and say, I've tried, and show them the links. I've tried and tried. Please, this is just wrong. It's just flat out wrong. Please help me. And sometimes they can intervene. Now, I have noticed that they say, even in their text, that it will take a long time for them to respond. They have so many million.
I get emails, and I just go ahead and
do
respond
it.
To them.
Yes, I do too.
Transfer them.
I do too. There was the cemetery that we all did together. I put up some graves and markers and so, and some lady said, that's just wrong. I said, okay. So I deleted it. And no problem. I agree with you. I don't know. I don't know your family, so I'm glad to delete it. I just deleted it. And but that's part of what they call that community. And there are community, if you will, etiquette rules or suggestions. And if you keep contacting them and they don't pay you any attention, then take your petition to FindAGrave itself, and maybe you can get a resolution. Otherwise, I would suggest you make a duplicate entry. There are lots of duplicate entries in there.
Well, see, I didn't even know she was in there to begin with, so I put her in our family grave, and then when my cousin passed away, I just went in and keyed in her name. Well,
it already there. Yeah, I've done the same thing. I went out and I was, when I was so excited I was going to do the whole thing. I was like, it never occurred to me It never occurred to me that someone else did my cemetery. Someone else did my family cemetery. But that's because there are 5 or 6 other very active burials in that cemetery, and they did it, and that's fine. I have no problem with it.
Some people go to the newspaper too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing that. There are a whole series of people who want to do this, but they can't get out, and so they look at the obituaries in their hometown and do them all. They look at the burial, they look at that person, they even copy the obituary and put it straight in there. Many times that has happened. I mean, I did something and somebody popped. I was like, how did that happen? And I realized that it was a complete copy of the obituary in the newspaper. And again, that's part of the benefit, and that's part of the disadvantage. Is that benefit is someone's done it for you. disadvantages, you can't correct it.
But one thing that you need to do, so that like if I pass away, I need to give somebody else permission.
Yes,
to
or your password.
password, so that they can.
Yeah, so they can take it over, yes. Yeah, that is a whole new world, isn't it, of digital assets.
I read one that someone had posted, and it was like I kept sending messages, and all of a sudden I see where somebody has put in there that so-and-so has passed away.
Right, right.
It was like, who, and they said, who takes care of his contribution, what
Right.
he's contributing.
And they're trying to resolve that. As I said, FindAGrave will transfer one at a time, but there are whole cemeteries that people have documented, and you can't get to those memorials. You can't get to those entries. So, as I say, there's advantages and disadvantages. So, well, thank you all. I appreciate you all being attentive. I didn't know how this would work out.